Alright, it's been a while since I made a video. I'm home from Africa now. I have the Oldsmobile out of storage. I got it at a friend of mine's garage just to tinker around with, do some work on it. The brakes were shot. And one of the things I did was I replaced the master cylinder and brake booster. I just got that from the local auto parts store. I could have rebuilt the master cylinder, but I was having a little bit of trouble finding a rebuild kit. Seems like a lot of people don't cover rebuild or carry rebuild kits anymore. They want you to buy their remanufactured ones. Of course, it costs a little more. Prime example is these calipers. I had a passenger side caliper that was stuck in place. The driver's side wasn't too bad, but the caliper on the passenger side was sticking enough that just in a short mile or so trip to the house, it wore the pads down to the metal, and of course now I have to order rotors, which is no big deal. So I decided to rebuild the calipers. Cheapest ones I could find in an auto parts store were $76, and of course, had to wait 4 or 5 days for them to get them. So I got a hold of summitracing.com, who sent me this Dorman brake caliper rebuild kit. Comes with a hydraulic seal and the dust boot. Once you get the calipers off the car, leave the bleeder screws tight where your banjo bolt goes, your rubber brake line coming into the caliper. If you blow air in that, your piston will pop all the way out. Don't put your fingers here, it will smash them. This is what your piston looks like. This one was a little bit rough where it was sticking. You can see where it had some few little gouges, but it's only up around the dust boot mainly. Most of that's on the outside where it contacts the pads, so not a big deal. I chose to take some red Scotch-Brite, it's WD-40, polish it out. It doesn't catch the nail anymore, and that's the main thing I was worried about, is it tearing my boot. So in your caliper here, the hydraulic seal rides right here. And then your dust boot is also, it seats down in this groove right here. It rides over top of the piston, kind of like that. I'm not going to push it on there because it's not lubricated. And that boot lip will catch this, so when your piston comes out, it has that dust boot around it, and obviously your piston slides back in there. You can get a brake hone, cylinder hone, or something like that, and hone these out if they're bad. Mine weren't that bad, so I just again used the Scotch-Brite and the WD-40 to kind of polish them up. Already have one somewhat put back together, and it's a pretty straightforward process. And once you get them apart, you'll see how they work. They're very simple. Hydraulic pressure comes in the back. Your hydraulic fluid comes in the back, basically just fills this reservoir, pushes your piston out. Bleeder screws are on the top end. I went ahead and got new bleeder screws because, as you can see, those didn't come out very easy. I ended up using easy outs. Local auto parts store had replacements. Same thing with the crush washers that go in between your brake hose and your caliper. Looks kind of like that. Mounts on there with a banjo bolt. Once these are soaking in cleaner, here's your banjo bolt. There's a hole in it. Lets the fluid through. So all said, with the caliper rebuild kit from Summit with shipping was $10.94, something like that. Took these to work, sandblasted them, washed them out in the parts washer. Through a coat of self-etching primer, duplicolor self-etching primer. It's like $3 or $4 at the parts store. And then this is just a cast iron coating engine block paint that I put on there. I just had it laying around. It's probably just $4 or $5 at the parts store or something like that. Went ahead and painted the inside of the pistons so that they don't get rusted up in there. It doesn't really do anything to help it. It just makes it look a little nicer for my personal benefit. Good C-clamp. always good when you're putting these things back together, or when you're taking them off the car, because a lot of times the piston will stick out. I don't have this one seated, but you can see that I'm just, once I have that seal in the ring lands there, that I slid the boot over top of the piston, got it centered up in the hole where it's not going to be in a bind, pushed it in as far as I could by hand, then using my C-clip to push it the rest of the way in. And then what I'm using is just a plain punch and this little pecker, as my son calls it, my little hammer, to just kind of lightly tap around that seal, make sure it's seated in place. Have any more questions or any other little projects you want to see, let me know, and I'll do my best to show you. These are the brackets that hold the rubber hoses. When I get the new ones in, I can show you the installation on that. But you have that little piece there, just slides up in that hole, and then there's, I believe they call it a C-clip, slides on there, and then your hard line bolts into that. Highly, highly, highly recommend, if you're working on a 42-year-old car or anything that's been driven a lot, to get some deep creeple or PB blaster, something like that. Soak it for a couple of days, you know, give it a squirt here and there, let it do its job. Makes taking things apart a lot easier. Stay tuned. Alright, got that one back together. Got my new bleeder screw in. What I like to do is I take some of this aniseed lubricant and just lightly coat the threads of your bleeder. Don't want to get carried away with it, because you really don't want that stuff in your brake fluid, just because it could clog a line or something like that. I just coat, like I said, the threads on your bleeder. Hopefully it'll be easier to get out the next time you need to take it out for any reason. Obviously the boot looks a little weird because it's all the way over the piston. That'll correct itself once I put some fluid in it and start bleeding the brakes. It'll push that piston out around that boot the way it's supposed to, and it'll seat. One thing that I forgot to mention earlier in the video is I've been using just plain brake fluid. I'll put it in the cup, use a little brush to lubricate the inside of the cylinder here, and especially that hydraulic seal that goes in there. Coat the piston lightly with it, and it'll make it a lot easier to push it in. That way you don't get that square seal rolled. If you roll it, it can tear, it can get in a bind, come out of the seat, then you won't have pressure. Instead of it pushing the piston out, it'll just come out around the piston and then coat your brake pads and rotors and everything else, which is just as bad as the caliper being bad. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I think all said. Caliper rebuild kit was $10.94 something with shipping from Summit Racing. Bleeder screws, $2 for a pair. At I bought them at Advance Auto. Crush washers, I think, were $3. And then the paints and stuff like that, you don't have to paint them. I just chose to. That's pretty much it. So say $30, give or take, in rebuilding 2 calipers versus $74 for brand new ones. It's easy. Do it with basic hand tools. You know, air compressor. If you got a friend or a buddy that's got an air compressor, it makes it a lot easier. Small hammer, little punch or something. You could probably even do that with a screwdriver if you're real careful. Just try not to tear the rubber. And just some basic stuff.